thank you everybody for coming for this third installment of our spring speakers series. We're very, very glad you have the interest of tuning in. And again, I think Mary wins the prize, obviously, for geography. And I see that kitchen behind you, so I hope you've made plenty of snacks for everybody before we convene this evening. But it's very excited. We've built up a lot of buzz thanks to Barry and his campaign efforts out there. And I can't thank Steve enough tonight for tonight's presentation. I'm hoping I'm not stealing any of Barry's thunder, but of course, as most of you probably know, this is considered almost required training for our docents, volunteers that might be coming to the mill. Eventually, we will have links to the past two series, so you can view those in their entirety. And of course, we're building up for our opening on May the 1st, which promises to be a great event. So, Mary, you get a pass, but for the rest of you who are hopefully within driving distance, we hope you'll swing by and take a look at us and see what we have to offer, and even welcome your suggestions, and maybe perk your interest in maybe volunteering too. So with that, Barry, thank you very much, and take it away.
Okay, thank you, Connie. Welcome to all of our participants. I am so looking forward to this evening as we continue Old Wye Mill's first season of virtual programming. First task I must do is to acknowledge the support of our sponsor. This is all made possible by a grant from the Maryland Heritage Areas Authority with Maryland state funds through the Stories of the Chesapeake Heritage Area. This funding has enabled Old Wye Mill to put in place and now implement comprehensive planning for revitalized visitor engagement at the historic site in Wye Mills. So this series of programs was designed to give our community an understanding of the historical, economic, racial, geographic, and technological context of Old Wye Mill. Obviously, tonight we'll be talking about the technological context. And we have a wonderful speaker for you. Steve Childers is a member of Old Wye Mill's advisory committee as of only a few months ago, but we're delighted to have him aboard. Steve became interested in old mills not long ago, only about the year 2000. He caught mill fever when he was asked as a very skilled woodworker to create some wooden cogs for Abbott's Mill, which is within Abbott's Mill Nature Center in Delaware. And let me just close that, get those more people in. And for the past 15 years, he has been doing the mill tours on the third Saturday of every month as a teacher naturalist at Abbott's Mill outside of Dover, Delaware. Steve had retired after a 20-year career as an Air Force mechanic and went into woodworking and then into working on the mill. And I'm very much looking forward to hearing his teaching us all about the revolutionary innovations of Oliver Evans. Go ahead.
All right, thank you, Barry. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay, that's good enough for me.
Barry,
I'm on the board.
Steve, the speaker, like say, if he can take control and make his image larger on the screen.
I will in just a second.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Yeah. I'm on the board of directors of the Mid-Atlantic chapter of SPOOM, which is the Society for the Preservation of Old Mills. This gives me an opportunity to visit mills all over our region, which is Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia, and Delaware. And when we visit these mills, we often hear that such and such a mill has the Oliver Evans system. So who was Oliver Evans and what's this all about, his system? I hope to answer that for you tonight. All right, let me share my screen and we'll go on. All right, just a minute here. All right, that's close enough. I apologize for my cursor. I have been trying to make it larger and it's just not working out. In fact, I can't even see it now. Oh, there we go. All right, before I answer that question, I'd like to give credit to my main source of information. I borrowed heavily for this presentation from a book by Eugene Ferguson. The book is Oliver Evans, Inventive Genius of the American Revolution. It's put out by the Hagley Museum. I just checked the other day and on Amazon, and it's available for $877.95. However, if you dig around, you might find it a little cheaper than that. I even found it online for free. So don't give up if you're interested in that book. Everybody hear me okay? Put your fingers up. Okay, good. All right. Up until the late 18th century, the late 1700s, the operation of grist mills was a very, very labor-intensive process. And it left many opportunities for contamination of the product. Whether that was cornmeal or flour. And even back then, people didn't like finding specks of, they didn't know what in their flour. But it's important that we understand the mindset of that period. Up until the early 1800s, there was not much innovation in industry, and things were done pretty much the way they'd always been done. Sons were told by their fathers, that's the way my father taught me to do it, and that's the way you're going to do it. But one of the reasons there was not much innovation is because people tended to accept things the way they had always been. And it was difficult for most people to think outside of the box. So remember that as we continue. Oliver Evans was born right there where that little dot is in northern Delaware. And if we zoom in there, if you're familiar with the Wilmington area at all, this is where the Wilmington and Western Railroad is, and also Green Bank Mill is right there. And if you take a ride on the Wilmington and Western, right here where it crosses Falk Road, that's where the mill was. That's where Oliver Evans' mill was. Actually, he and his brothers built a mill there. We'll get into that in a minute. But that's where they lived. In 1782, when Oliver was 27 years old, he and his younger brother Joseph worked in Tuckahoe, Maryland. And as near as I can tell, I've talked to some people that live in this area, and Tuckahoe was right there where Hillsborough is now, or close to there. They opened a small general store there. They were only there for a couple of months, but that's where he got his first ideas that led to the automatic flour mill. I suspect that he probably visited a mill in the area to purchase flour for his little store. And he must have been surprised at the amount of labor involved in producing that flour. The mill might have been what was then called Seth's Mill, down here labeled as Elbin's Mill now. That was the last owner of it, Mr. Elbin. Or it might have been Wye Mill, which is 7 miles to the west. Or maybe some other mill that I don't know about. In any case, he was only there a few months, but that's where he got to thinking about this process. He was called back to Newport in July, and he and his older brothers, John and this name's hard to pronounce, Theophilus, I guess, purchased part of the farm from their father with the intention of building a mill on Red Clay Creek. This is a generic picture. This is not his mill. Oliver supervised the outfitting of the mill, and at about the same time, he married Sarah Tomlinson. But because of a lack of money, he did not incorporate his ideas into the mill right away. Rather, he carefully made drawings and models until he was satisfied that they would work. As Hezekiah Niles, editor of the Weekly Register, would later recall, Evans gained a reputation as a man who would never be worth anything because he was always spending his time on some contrivance or other. Some people might have said that about me at one time or another. Evans' ideas made no changes in the way that grain was cleaned, ground, cooled, bolted, and packed. The changes were in the way that it moved about the mill from one machine to the next. The 5 main improvements that he eventually came up with were the bucket elevator. You guys might recognize that picture on the right there. I stole that from one of your online publications. I don't know if that's from your mill or not, but that's an early bucket elevator made of wood. Now they're made of tin, or actually nowadays, if you buy them, they're made out of plastic, of course. All right, the bucket elevator, the horizontal screw conveyor, sometimes known as an Archimedes screw. And this is just one type of them. There are several different types of them. The descender, the drill. This is actually taken at Abbott's Mill. This is a drill, as he called it. What it does is move material horizontally. It's got a chain that goes around here with little paddles on it that pull the grains horizontally. And the hopper boy. And this actually was his invention totally. The other stuff he just borrowed from other people that had used it for other things, but never anything to do with a grist mill. As Evans recalled it, to make a machine that would both spread and gather at the same time then seemed absurd and caused him months of the most intensive thinking, for the absurdity always presented itself to baffle and deter me. And he talked about losing sleep over it. He just laid there in bed at night thinking about it. How could I do this? But after months of thinking, he finally came up with the answer, and well, we'll get into that. Sorry, I went too far. Despite his great ideas, the mill that he and his brothers were building opened in 1785 as a conventional mill, while Oliver tried to find money to hire carpenters to build the elevators and the hopper boy. He approached several large millers for financial help without luck. One of them was James Latimer, a local flour merchant and justice of the Newcastle County Court of Common Pleas. After hearing Evans' description of his elevator and hopper boy, he was unconvinced and exclaimed, "Oliver, you cannot make water run uphill and you cannot make wooden millers." However, Latimer's son George urged Oliver to petition the Delaware legislature for the exclusive right to make his milling improvements. And in 1787, a state patent was granted for a period of 15 years. Before the federal patent law was passed in 1790, it was necessary to get a patent in each state, and Evans also received one in Maryland, Pennsylvania, and New Jersey. I'm sorry, New Hampshire, not New Jersey. After the Evans Mill on Red Clay Creek was finally equipped with elevators and a hopper boy, two Quaker millers came to see the improvements. I think Oliver knew they were coming because when they got to the mill, he was out in the field working and the mill was operating all by itself. They inspected the mill at their leisure, but he was disappointed to later learn that the Quakers thought his mill a set of rattle traps unworthy the notice of any man of sense. On retrospect, it would probably have been better if he had been there to explain how it all worked to somebody that didn't have a clue. In 1789, Oliver Evans traveled to Maryland to visit the large Ellicott mills on the Patapsco River. The Ellicotts were much more progressive millers and Quakers, and they readily adopted his elevators and the hopper boy. And in exchange, they gave him exclusive rights to use a device of their own designs, the screw conveyor. He improved it by replacing the continuous helical screw with a series of small wooden paddles that prevented the meal from caking. The principle remained the same, and from then on, Evans called it the conveyor. In the fall of 1790, Evans moved his family to Wilmington and invited the public to come and see a model of his automatic mill. A Brandywine miller thought enough of it to have Evans install the machinery in his mill, and other Quaker millers came to see it in operation. As Evans later explained, when the whole thing was going, all the millers assembled about the hopper boy, where they remained in silent astonishment until one of them exclaimed, "It will not do, it cannot do. It is impossible that it should do." Of course, it was doing quite well the whole time. Within a short time, most of the other Brandywine mills were equipped with elevators and hopper boys, and 5 of the mill owners signed a testimonial that the improvements were a great savings of waste, labor, expense, and not subject to get out of order. We therefore recommend them as worthy the attention of those concerned with the manufacture of grain into flour. As soon as the Federal Patent Office opened in 1790, Evans filed an application, and his was the 3rd patent issued in the United States, signed by George Washington himself and also Thomas Jefferson. By 1792, over 100 mills were using Evans' ideas, including George Washington, who paid a license fee of $40 for his pair of millstones. Oliver sent his brother Evan to supervise the installation because he was too busy to stop and do something for the President of the United States. Oliver moved his family to Philadelphia, and after several years of research, writing, and the search for financial backing, he published The Young Millwright and Miller's Guide in 1795. And these are quite available right now. In fact, I'm sure you have one at Wye Mills. In the 3 years previous, Oliver was so engrossed in his research and writing that he neglected to earn a living, and his wife found it necessary to sell the linen cloth that she had made herself to clothe her children in order to buy bread for the table. Oliver first intended the book to be merely an instruction pamphlet for millers and millwrights, but when he consulted earlier writings, he found that the data was often unreliable, and he insisted on explaining the principles that everything was based on. John Nicholson, Comptroller General of Pennsylvania, loaned Evans $1,000 interest-free to get his book published. Within 2 years, Nicholson himself was in serious financial trouble, but Evans was able to repay him in full within 10 years. Evans' 440-page book with 26 engraved illustrations was issued in 15 editions between 1795 and 1860. Reproductions are available now on Amazon for as little as $19. The description on Amazon begins with, "This work has been selected by scholars as being culturally important and is part of the knowledge base of civilization as we know it." Evans went on to patent a process for making millstones, and he built a profitable business in bolting cloth, elevator buckets, millstone hoisting screws, and other grist mill components. So without knowing it, many of our mills may have some of his equipment in there. He sold them in his Philadelphia store. He built a blacksmith shop attached to the store where his brother Evan and the blacksmith developed and patented a lever-operated flour press for packing flour down into barrels. Before that, they just stood on the barrel with their feet and pounded it down. Probably wouldn't pass the health department these days. Although automated mills were popping up all over, many millers used his idea without buying a license. Although they had not thought of the process themselves, once they saw it in operation, it seemed so self-evident that many of them thought that paying to use it was not necessary. For many years, Evans had numerous lawyers helping him try to protect his rights. In 1812, the Evans family moved into a home they bought on Sassafras Street, which is now Arch Street in Philadelphia, and were in a position to manage the store and live the rest of their lives comfortably. But Oliver had many new ideas popping up in his head. For several years, he had been thinking and tinkering with steam power. It was not an entirely new idea. Low-pressure steam engines had been around for a couple of decades, but Evans thought the future was in high-pressure steam. A high-pressure steam engine is much smaller than a low-pressure engine of the same power and is thus much more portable. Since 1803, one of his engines had been at work in his store on 9th and Market Streets. Of course, he had it work in a way where visitors could easily see it, running a screw mill that he had designed and patented for grinding plaster of Paris. And to show its versatility, he also used it to saw slabs of marble. In Evans' words, the driving of 12 saws in heavy frames, sawing at the rate of 100 feet of marble in 12 hours, made a great show and excited much attention. I should think so. Evans knew that the engine could be used for nearly any task, but visitors had a difficult time making the same assumption. Remember what I said at the beginning. Watching the steam engine sawing marble, visitors wanted to know if it could be used to saw wood. Could it grind grain? Could it power a boat? Of course, he said yes, but there was still a lot of doubt. Evans eventually received a commission from the Philadelphia Board of Health to build a steam-powered dredge to clean the docks and remove sandbars. When it was finished, he added powered wheels to it. It was 37-foot long scow, and he drove it down the streets of Philadelphia for a mile to Schuylkill River. On the way, he circled all the way around the Waterworks building on Market and Broad Streets. And for context, this would have been at about the same time that Lewis and Clark made their trip to the West Coast up the Missouri River and back. Between 1806 and 1812, Evans built the Mars Works. That's M-A-R-S, Mars Works, a large group of engineering shops to build his engines and boilers. Within a short time, it became the leading shop in Philadelphia for building steam engines and other heavy machinery. By 1811, it was also building iron gears of all sizes, and during the War of 1812, he produced cast iron cannons. Evans shipped a steam engine across the Allegheny Mountains to a mill in Pittsburgh, managed by his son George. After he had shipped his third engine to the Ohio River Valley, he decided to build a Western version of his Mars Works, the Pittsburgh Steam Engine Company, which was managed by George Evans. As the Mars Works business grew, Oliver Evans turned his management over to his two sons-in-law and devoted all of his time to defending his flour mill patent, which by now had expired. A private bill entitled An Act for the Relief of Oliver Evans was passed by the United States Congress and signed by President Jefferson on January 1808, which extended his patent for another 14 years. The president paid Evans' license fee of $80 for his two sets of millstones, plus interest of $9.60. When Oliver Evans died in 1819, the Pittsburgh Gazette declared that his name would be remembered by a nation's gratitude when the comparatively insignificant herd of metaphysicians and conquerors have since passed into total oblivion. And in the 70 years between the granting of his patent and the American Civil War, the American flour exports rose from about 1 million barrels to over 20 million barrels of flour. And if anybody's interested in trivia, in World War II, a United States Liberty ship was named after him, the SS Oliver Evans. And in 2001, roughly about the same time I got interested in mills, Oliver Evans was inducted into the National Inventors Hall of Fame. All right, so that you can better understand how a system like that works, I'm going to take you on a quick tour of part of Abbott's Mill. And I only picked Abbott's Mill because I already have the pictures and the slides and stuff. But the Wye Mill process is very, very similar to this. Let me find my cursor here. Can you see the cursor moving around? All right. In a mill like this, there are elevators that go all the way from the bottom floor down here in the basement, clear up to the attic. And they're a continuous, endless belt. So the belt actually goes up and back down again. Up and back down, up and back down. You might think of an elevator that just carries the material up and dumps it into a chute where it falls into another operation, sometimes, but not always. In the attic, the top of the elevators look like this. And often the material must pass by diverters that give it a chance of more than one path. This is a diverter right here. There's another one right there, another one right there, one there, one over here going the other direction. In this picture, there's actually 8 diverters. They look like this inside. Material comes down here, can pass this way, or if this little paddle here is moved over the other way, then they go the other way. If you know anything about computers, a mill like this is a simple binary computer. The entire mill is. This isometric drawing shows the corn operation in a mill like Abbott's or Wye Mill. Corn is dumped into a hole in the floor right here, and it falls down to the bottom of this elevator. The elevator carries it all the way up to the top floor. In Abbott's Mill, the corn is dumped into a corn cleaner, which is nothing but a chute with a screen on the bottom of it. The corn falls across the screen, and the dirt and seeds fall down through the screen and come down a different route to be collected in the main floor down there. And by the way, the millers would deduct the weight of that trash from the weight of the material brought into the mill, and that's what they paid for. They didn't pay for dirt, as they used to say. This is what the corn cleaner looks like here. The screen is right there. From there, it goes past a couple more diverters where it can go different paths to a lot of different bins. From any of the bins, it can come down to one of the millstones. And after it's ground into flour or cornmeal, as the case may be, it falls from the millstone down another chute to a different elevator. And as you visit a mill like Abbott's or Wye Mill, and you see that the product goes through some machine, the path it takes from that machine is always going to be the same answer. It's always going to fall through a hole in the floor and go to a different elevator. Always a different elevator, never the same one. That's one of the things I had trouble understanding when I first took myself on a tour of Abbott's Mill. There were all these elevators. Why on earth were there so many of them? Well, it took me a long time to understand that. That elevator takes it back upstairs and it goes through a sifter. And from the sifter, it comes down several bagging chutes here. You can put a bag on here and bag the product and sell it or give it back to the farmer. So that's the Oliver Evans system in a nutshell. Let me find my text here and make sure I'm caught up. During the entire process, the miller doesn't have to move from the ground to floor. Thank you, Oliver Evans. To finish, I'd like to directly quote from author Eugene Ferguson, who wrote the book I referenced for this presentation. He finished his book by stating, in addition to the legacies of mechanized production processes and high-pressure steam engines, Evans established the principle that federal patents could be protected in courts. Many a dreamer and visionary can safely be dismissed as a person who would never be worth anything because he was always spending his time on some contrivance or other. Other visionaries, like Oliver Evans, must be taken seriously. Now, if you'll bear with me for just a minute, I'll try to take us on a quick tour of George Washington's mill at Mount Vernon. And by the way, this is a YouTube video that I got special permission from Mount Vernon to use. And I'd like to urge you, if you want to use somebody's YouTube video, ask them. I dug around on Mount Vernon's website and found what I thought was probably the right person to ask, and his email address was there, so I sent him an email. And this was on a weekend evening, and within an hour, I had an answer back from him. And he said, yeah, sure, we'd be tickled to death if you'd use it. All right, I'm going to stop sharing. And if we're lucky, all right, now I got to find the share thing again. All right, does everybody see George Washington's grist mill?
Yes, I do.
Is it taking up the whole screen?
Yes.
Good. All right, this doesn't last very long. I want to show you this especially because it shows a very good view of the hopper boy, which is really the only part of the Oliver Evans system that Oliver himself invented. The rest of the system, he borrowed other people's ideas that they had been using for other things, but never for a grist mill. There's no talking in this, but there's just the sound of a mill. I think there is anyway. There we go. Now we're up at the top floor, and this is where the hopper boy is. There's little paddles down on those arms that slowly force the flour toward the center of the circle. In the center of the circle, it falls into a little hole, which you'll see here in just a second. And the whole idea is to cool it. All right. Any questions?
I have a question. We were saying that Oliver Evans made stones or cut stones or, for the mills at one point in his life. Do you know where he got the stone from?
I do not.
Because I know that's kind of I didn't know if it said in any of her books.
Yeah, no, I didn't. I never did find that out. Some quarry someplace, but who knows?
Right. It just seems to me that that's a sort of a different undertaking from inventing the pieces to the mill. But thank you.
He was interested in supplying material for mills, and that's one of the things they needed. I know that at Abbott's Mill, our stone says right on the side of it, Baltimore. But that doesn't mean where the stone came from. That's just where they made it into a millstone.
Where they actually did the cutting of it.
Yep.
Okay.
Any other questions?
I want to ask you about if there's any way to date installations of Oliver Evans innovations, because I know at Old Wye Mill, I don't think we really know what year the system of elevators and descenders and screw conveyors was actually installed.
Right.
The fact that we are so close to Tuckahoe, where Oliver Evans clearly spent time, but as you've pointed out, that was very early on before he patented or even created his inventions.
That would have been the 1780s, yeah.
I just wonder if there's any way to, if anyone has done, a chronology, or if they changed over time so that you can date them by, before such and such a date or after such and such a date, they varied.
Yeah, like did the gears change or something like that?
Exactly.
Yeah. No, I don't know of anything like that.
Steve, how old was he when he first started?
He was in his 20s.
And how was he self-taught, or did he attend some kind of school, engineering background?
He actually got a job in a textile mill, making carding combs. And I don't understand the process exactly, but apparently he had to cut wire to exact length, and he built a machine that would do that automatically, thousands of them an hour.
And do we know where his last installation was in a mill?
His last one?
In other words, yeah, he's starting off there in Tuckahoe. He did our area. I was just curious if he had modified, like Barry was asking about. Did he
No,
modify his designs?
he and his brothers supplied information and equipment to mills all over the East Coast.
Okay.
And mills all over the world are using the system now.
All right, thank you.
Hmm.
I have a quick question. I saw on the video there at George Washington's mill, the water is obviously diverted in. Is that typical of all mills, or are they sometimes running just on the river water?
Oh, no, they're almost always diverted one way or another. There's usually a dam, and sometimes a short, sometimes a real long waterway.
Okay.
A good example is Cooch Diet Mill in Newcastle County, Delaware. The dam is at least a half a mile away, and there's a big long canal that goes to the mill. It's no longer operational now, but at one time there was.
And was that just because they were that far away from the water? So that was what they had to do? Or was there
Delaware's pretty flat, so you sometimes have to travel a long way to get enough height to run a mill. It all works on gravity, of course.
Okay, thank you.
That's what makes Old Wye Mill's water wheel a little bit different, because ours is, Steve, you can correct me if I'm wrong, about twice the width of a normal water wheel, because we certainly don't have that declination and elevation. We're very flat on the eastern shore.
Exactly. That's a good point. You'll notice if you study old mills, especially if you get old mill news and look through some of the mills that are featured in there, some of them have great big, huge water wheels that are 30 or 40 feet in diameter. But if they're that tall, they're usually not very wide. And vice versa, if they're not very tall, they're usually pretty wide.
I have a question about the wind-driven mills such as Sprocket Mill in Dorchester County. Was there enough power with the wind to drive this machinery?
Absolutely. Yes, that's easy to answer.
And so they were equipped, the wind type mills were equipped as well.
Sure, yes.
So are you saying that most of the mills, or a good portion of them, are either water driven or wind driven today?
Yes. Well, today, a lot of them are powered by electricity, of course, but back in the day, they were usually water driven one way or another. Some of them were operated by the tide, actually. They were down, in tidal water, and the water coming in with the tide and going back out with the tide would operate the mill. I've never visited one of those. I think that would be interesting.
But the basic concept of mills that are structured, are they structured basically from the past? And,
yes.
And using that same methodology of grinding.
Yeah, once you get past the power source, the rest of the mill is all the same.
Oh, okay.
Steve, do you
Yes.
have a sense of how many of the Oliver Evans mill installations were supervised personally by Oliver Evans or one of his brothers or sons, and the extent to which, on the other hand, they just simply patented or gave people the information that was available in his book for a fee, and people went ahead and built it themselves or figured out how to get it to work without their supervision?
Yeah, really, I don't know exactly. The book mentions a number of mills. But usually Oliver Evans didn't visit the mills himself. He was so busy with business that he would send one of his brothers down to do it.
Mhm.
That's the feeling I got anyway.
So probably a member of his family did do or supervise many of the installations, at least in the first few decades, let's say.
Exactly. And the ones that were closer, and I think the technology kind of spread out, over the years.
Mhm. Very interesting.
It is.
Anyone else?
Steve, do you know much about that, the diagram you showed us of the boat on the land boat, if you will? Do you know much about that?
Only what the book told me. I'll tell you that picture is an artist's concept of it from talking to somebody. He never actually saw it, apparently.
Very good. I'm just curious
So
how
it may have looked something like that, and maybe it didn't. Probably it didn't.
Okay, good. So corn mash was still a thing back then. Good.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Now, I did a little research on my own this afternoon in preparation for tonight, just out of curiosity to see in a list of inventors from the United States, where did Oliver Evans fit? And in most of the lists, he wasn't even on it, which really surprised me. Here he got the third patent ever issued in the United States that entirely changed the industrial process, and most people have never even heard of it.
Wow.
We've all heard of Edison and Morse and Bell, and I've got a whole list of them here. Goodyear, Tesla, Westinghouse, even Ben Franklin, Henry Ford, but we never hear of Oliver Evans.
So he had a lousy publicity agent.
Yeah.
Definitely
Yes, ever
needed a
since,
PR
yeah.
machine. I will point out that I have devoted a full panel in the new orientation exhibit that we just installed at Old Wye Mill on the grinding floor. There's a whole panel, of course, dedicated to Oliver Evans. And I vetted this text with some pretty serious scholars. So I claim in this panel, Oliver Evans was America's first great engineer. On that basis alone, he should be more well known.
He really
Then I
should.
write, the Industrial Revolution was based upon the concept of the continuous process, which Evans pioneered.
Exactly.
And it was an idea that had never before been applied to manufacturing. And really, it is the foundation of things like the Model T Ford, the whole idea of now I'm blanking on what the term is, where each process is in a continuous flow.
Assembly line.
Within a factory. I'm sorry?
Assembly line.
An assembly line, thank you.
There you go. Yeah.
Aging brain.
The term that I found this afternoon that explains him perfectly, he invented the first fully automated industrial process.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's very similar to what you were saying, Barry.
Exactly. Yeah. So there you go. If we do not have any further questions, I just want to thank Steve so much for sharing your research and your knowledge with all of us this evening. I want to remind all our participants that Old Wye Mill opens to the public on May 1st. We have an exciting lineup of activities. If you are available that day, it's from 10 to 3. We'd love to see you. There are 2 more presentations in this series next Thursday night and a week from Thursday night. I invite you to go to Eventbrite or the oldwyemill.org website and find out more about them. And I hope you'll join us again for one of those presentations. and thank you very much for participating. If you are a current or volunteer or trainee volunteer, please stick around for a little postlude, a little volunteer-oriented discussion for a few minutes after our at the conclusion, which is now. So thank you all very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome. Mary, thank you for joining us. I'll see you Sunday.
Okay, that was great. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Steve, for that presentation. I being a novice about meals, I really learned a lot.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I was a novice 20 years ago myself. We got to start somewhere.
Absolutely.
Well, you've given us a wonderful start with a great deal of material to chew over.
I'll see you guys on the 1st.
Thank you, Steve.
Good night.
Good night. I'm still here, Barry.
Wonderful. Thank you, Donna. It's great to see you.
Yes.
And
I just like to say, unfortunately, I won't be able to be there on the 1st of May, but I had an injury from my tractor and I had to keep my leg elevated because I injured my leg.
oh no.
So doctor tells me I have to stay off my foot. As active as I am, it's very difficult to just be still, but I would love to have been there on the 1st of May, but I won't be there.
I can just imagine. I hope you're not in pain.
Yes, I am.
Oh. Well, our thoughts and prayers are with you as you, heal from the accident, and I hope that you'll be back on your feet, literally, very soon, and that you're receiving good care in the meanwhile.
I am. Thank you all. I'm still here for the post-interlude.
Okay, very good. So I would love for those of you who have turned off your cameras, if you could join us on with your video camera so we can see you. And I think everybody can unmute. I wonder if I can do that for you.
I'm unmuted.
I can't do that. I can't unmute you. I normally begin our volunteer discussion by asking if there are particular facts or information that the speaker presented that are directly relevant to how we're interpreting the mill. In this case, I'm not sure I can ask that question because I think virtually everything that Steve said could be incorporated into a narrative or an interpretive story that we're giving in the mill. But I would be interested to hear from, let's say, our veteran interpreters, if there was anything especially new or striking that grabbed you, that you might that you think would be of strong interest to the public, to start our discussion.
I was intrigued that Oliver was right down the street, 7 miles away. I had no idea.
How close Tuckahoe was.
Sure.
Yeah. And so, I mean, indeed, if he was running a general store, perhaps he did come to Old Wye Mill to purchase flour to sell to the public there. Great. Ellen, what?
It was interesting to me to see a larger mill for comparison, because a lot of people come in who have been to other mills, and just to have that little piece of extra information and to understand what their experience has been somewhere else is very helpful.
Mm-hmm.
The dividers, do we have those in the Old Wye Mill? The diverters, is that the word?
You do have them, yes.
We
Okay,
do.
I'm going to go look for them.
Well, you're probably not going to see them because they're up in the attic.
I can go up there.
Okay.
It says Miller's only. and
They,
I
they
cheat.
typically were not on the ground floor.
Right.
They were, but there were a couple ropes that would hang down, so you could pull one to divert it one way and pull the other to divert it the opposite way.
And so they would have done that in our mill.
Yes, oh yeah,
Because you said that, I mean, it is possible to operate the mill from the ground level only,
yes.
from the basic level, from one level.
Your
but-
miller does do that.
But to if he wants to change, he's got to go up, or can he do that from downstairs? Are there ropes he pulls?
He doesn't have to the way it's set up now, but
Okay.
back in the day, it certainly was set up that way. Yes.
That he would have to go up to do
Yes.
that.
Well,
Okay.
no, he'd have ropes down there to pull them, and
Yeah, down there. Okay, that he could activate from his level.
Yeah.
That would okay. I'm sorry, I've got to ask: are there any mills around now that don't have the Oliver Evans system in them? Were there millers who didn't convert?
yes, there were, but I'm not aware of any around here.
They possibly haven't survived.
For one thing, there aren't that many mills around here anymore.
Right, yeah.
Well, actually, Ellen, when we went with Frank McKelvey on that field trip,
Right.
we went to a mill that did not have an Oliver Evans system. I'm
Oh.
thinking that
No,
was
That's quite possible.
The
it was
Newland
a
Mill?
Newland Mill in Pennsylvania. I think that they
Okay.
were presenting the mill as it was pre-Oliver Evans. Steve, have you been there?
Oh, yes, I absolutely have.
Oh, it's a great mill.
It is a wonderful mill. I'm trying to think of the guy that runs the place. My mind's blank. Anyway, I'm sure it has the mill, the system, but I'm not sure that they always use it.
Okay.
I'm planning to go back. I'll ask.
So
But I was so impressed with the mill wheel they had there. It was so large and I guess I was sort of taken with that and didn't put the pieces together.
I urge all of you to visit YouTube and just put in there grist mill
Cool.
and tour mills all over the country, or all over the world for that matter. I was in a mill the other day in England.
Oh, cool.
And let me give you an offer. If you would like to come over and visit Abbott's Mill sometime, I give tours on the third Saturday of every month, and normally we charge $5. But if you tell me you're from Wye Mill, I won't charge anything.
I think it would be great to do a field trip where we
Yeah,
all come together, even if we get our separate, if we transport individually, but to meet there on a specific day so that we can have conversations.
normally our mill tours are on the third Saturday, but I'll do it anytime I'm available, and I'm retired, so that's most of the time.
That's great. Now, Abbott's Mill does not have a working, any working elements. Is that correct?
Oh, no, that's not right. We have a
Okay.
lot of working elements,
Tell us about it.
but we do not grind grain.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
I hear you, Connie. We do not have a water wheel either. We have a turbine,
Okay.
but the turbine does operate the millstone. We also have a 20 horsepower Fairbanks Morse diesel engine that operates the roller mills. Somewhere around the turn of the 20th century, the mill was converted to a roller mill for grinding cereal grains. But it
That
still
brings
uses
a
it.
question up. Do you have any insight as to the turbine equipment on our grounds? I mean,
You have a turbine?
yeah, lying on our grounds out behind the mill.
Oh, that's right. I have seen it. Yeah, yes, I do.
Yeah.
I don't know anything about it. I don't know where it was installed no, I don't know anything about it.
Well, you're with the rest of us, neither do we.
Yeah, I'd like to have it actually.
We'll talk.
I've been looking for one to display at Abbott's Mill because when visitors come to visit our mill, ours is underwater.
Can't see it.
Oh,
I
yeah.
mean, it won't work unless it's underwater.
Steve,
Yes.
this is Mike Billick. I'm with Carol. I've got a question. The device that Oliver Evans invented that cools the flour,
Yeah, yeah.
where is that located at Wye Mill?
It isn't. And we don't have one at Abbott's Mill either. Some mills didn't have them.
Okay, I thought I had been given bad information for all these years, but it's.
No. You don't
I'm
have one.
glad to hear we don't have one.
Some mills don't need them because of the process that they do. And I guess our two mills are two of those mills.
Our mill is
Got it.
more cool.
I
Right.
want to answer that just to add the information that I have, and I'm not sure I know where we got the information, but my understanding was that there had been a hopper boy up in the loft, but that in 1918, when Winthrop Blakesley updated the mill, he bought a lot of new equipment. He put in that mini Marvel mill. He replaced the hopper boy with a bolter, and the bolter is still there.
That's right. I wanted to mention that.
Okay.
The bolter that you saw on the George Washington's mill is a pretty big one. You have a bolter too, and it's a little bit smaller, and it only separates the grain into two classes, whereas the bigger one separates it into three. But you certainly do have one, yes.
Okay.
It's up in the attic directly over the millstone, really.
I might be able to show you. I think I can show you my screen. I believe I can do that. Let's see if I can figure out how to do that.
We have faith in you, Barry.
Well, it would not be wise to have a lot of faith in my technological ability. Because where is that? Oh, yeah. Click on that. How about if we click on that? That way. Okay. No. Where is share screen? Oh, that's over
Down
here.
on the bottom on the
Share screen. Okay. And now I want to share. And this is a big mess here. Let's see if I can show you. Okay, we're going to minimize that. So now you're looking at the panel. This is the fourth panel in the new exhibit. And if you look down here, this American Marvel bolter,
Yeah.
you can see I wrote it probably replaced a hopper boy and is still in use today. So this is the little bolter that we believe that Winthrop Blakesley put in to replace the hopper boy. Then there's this bolter, which I would say is as big. This is up in the loft in the attic, and this one looks like it's about as big as the one in Mount Vernon. It's 8 feet long.
Wow.
Says it right there. This is a lot of stuff from our attic. Okay.
Very good.
I'm gonna end that. Any other questions for Steve? In that case,
let me just throw something else at you.
Sure.
I encourage you all to visit my blog. A friend of mine and I have started a blog the first of the year. It's called Grist from Abbott's Mill. abbotsmills.net. Grist from abbotsmill.net. That's all one word, lowercase.
How many T's in Abbott's? Does Abbott's have one T or two T's?
Two,
Two, thank you.
just like the bees. ABBOTT.
Okay. .net. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
And anyway, I post something about mills on one week, and then Paul posts something about flora and fauna in the area the next week. I just had something about the flower operation in Abbott's Mill this past week, and starting tomorrow, Paul's going to have something about tiny snakes that are in the area. I had never heard of an earth snake. Had anybody ever heard of an earth snake before?
Never
There's
heard.
a lot of us have heard of ringneck snakes. They're all little tiny snakes. But anyway, that's in there this coming week.
Fantastic. Well, let me segue to next week's installment of our speaker series by pointing out that, Steve, you mentioned many, many times the Quaker millers of the Brandywine Valley.
Yeah.
And we know that Old Wye Mill did have Quakers who were millers in the 1800s.
Did they? Good.
Right? Next week, we're going to hear from Tony Cohen about the abolitionists and the Underground Railroad in the area around Wye Mills. And of course, the Quakers were instrumental. They were central to that story. So I think we'll learn a great deal about the context of our region in the later period, really after we presume Old Wye Mill adopted the Oliver Evans inventions, and was that sort of the next installment in that story. So I look forward to seeing you all a week from tonight. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Barry.
Thank you. You've been a great audience.
All right.
Thank you, Steve.
Bye.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.